No more illusions are left today about the regime moderating or changing its behavior. Years ago, the European Troika experienced human rights dialogue, critical dialogue, and constructive engagement with this regime. The outcome of each of these policies was just disastrous. Dear friends, opposition to the extension of the arms embargo against the regime, inaction vis-à-vis human rights abuses in Iran are not acceptable. Indifference towards constant movement of the intelligence ministry and Quds Force agents in Europe and giving them free hand to do business are all against the interests of the people of Iran and global peace and security. On behalf of the Iranian people's resistance, I propose a policy with 3 elements: human rights for the people of Iran, comprehensive embargo of the religious dictatorship, and recognition of the Iranian people's resistance for freedom and democracy. I urge the Parliament of Europe to urge the Council of Ministers to adopt a binding legislation to expel the Iranian regime's agents from the European soil, shut down the regime's embassies in all EU member states, and designate the IRGC and its proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and other countries as terrorist groups. An independent international mission must investigate the massacre of 30,000 political prisoners in Iran and the slaughter of more than 1,500 protesters by Khamenei during the November 2019 uprising. The mission must also investigate the condition of prisons and prisoners in Iran, particularly the political prisoners. We demand the release of all political prisoners.
The European Union and many governments in Europe are still constantly underestimating the nature of the Iranian regime. It's basically anti-Western nature and the threat which this regime could pose for Europe and for generally democratic societies all around the world. And therefore, I believe that it's once again time to push, excuse me, Mr. Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, to start some actions and also to explain to him that it is in our common interest, in the interest of Europe and in the interest of European democracies, not just to watch, but to act. There is only one political force which is so well organized and so relevant that it could pose the alternative to the current regime in Iran, and this is the PMOI under the leadership of Madam Rajavi.
We all know that the situation in Iran is deteriorating every day, that thousands of people have been participating and detained for participating in demonstrations over the past 2 years. This also shows that many people in Iran are tired and fed up with this regime. As my colleague in the European Parliament and many others, we are always there to help in order to bring a prosperous, democratic future for Iran that merits. Iranian people that they are so desperate seeking for this democratization of the country, for liberties that in the past they had, and it merits that.
We support requests for changes in Iran, for respect human rights, to respect the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have to stay firm, that we have to expose the atrocities of mullah regime, in particular the attitudes vis-à-vis political prisoners and the attitude vis-à-vis women, minors, and also citizens of dual citizenship, because persecution was a common experience also of many Europeans of Iranian origin.
Something that that we have to keep in mind, supporting Iranian people in their asking for freedom will show up again the weaknesses of the Iranian regime and will help a democratic transition that Iranian people are asking since many years ago.
40 years now of tyrannical regime of the mullahs, and there's no improvement in the lives of the Iranians, and there is no glimpse of freedom. We had just in November last year, we had the last monstrous expression of the repression of the regime. Over 1,500 young Iranians fall in the streets of the cities in Iran asking for freedom. We want no appeasement with this dictatorship, with this tyrannical regime in Tehran. We want a very resolute search for an end of this regime and for a peaceful and democratic Iran in the future.
Over the last 4 decades, the present regime in Iran has committed many crimes against humanity. The United Nations should send monitoring mission to Iran as soon as possible. We have to monitor the situation, we have to report, and we have to defend human rights in Iran, standing with Iranian people.
For me, as the rapporteur of the EPP group on Iran, it is a pleasure to speak in this conference on the human rights situation in Iran. The European Union has condemned the recent executions in the strongest terms. But more action is required. Inaction is counterproductive and will be misconstrued by Iran as a green light from your European Union vis-à-vis Tehran's egregious human rights abuses. EU relations with Iran cannot tolerate anything less than a halt to executions and clear progress on human rights.
La présidente Mariam Rajavi m'a demandé de m'exprimer une nouvelle fois devant vous sur la situation en Iran. Je regrette sincèrement que les instances européennes qui font des valeurs de liberté, de démocratie, de laïcité le socle de leurs actions soient trop silencieuses devant des actes qui sont des actes en contradiction avec ces valeurs et des actes qui sont finalement inacceptables. Certes, je le sais bien, le principe de non-ingérence est une des bases de notre conception des relations internationales. Mais pour autant, il nous revient aussi à nous de dénoncer un certain nombre de choses inacceptables. Les exécutions capitales, alors que nous sommes contre la peine de mort, les tortures, les emprisonnements arbitraires et même les tentatives d'action terroristes, y compris sur le territoire européen. Pour avoir été parlementaire européen, je sais qu'il y a un certain nombre de débats, mais moi ce qui me frappe toujours, c'est de voir que, en ce qui concerne des actions inacceptables commises en Iran, il y a beaucoup moins de condamnations et des condamnations beaucoup moins fortes que celles que l'on peut avoir pour des actes qui ressemblent et qui sont commis dans d'autres pays. Alors aujourd'hui, et je le dis devant, je le sais, des parlementaires européens, je pense qu'il est indispensable que soient réellement condamnés ces agissements par les différentes instances européennes, et il était également indispensable que l'on en tire des conséquences concrètes.
I would like to convey to you, once again, my support so that the Iranian regime puts an end to the persistent violations of human rights, and most significantly, to the death penalty that the regime uses as a way of systematically wiping out the political opposition. Again, I take this opportunity to commend the work of the democratic opposition and guarantee you that the European Union does indeed listen to the plight of the Iranian people.
Today, the European Union and United Nations are following, and they do very right, the situation in Belarus, and they protest and they call for punitive action. This is very good, and we wish them success. But the question is, why in Belarus they act and the atrocities of the Iranian regime do not deserve the same attention? Why? Because in Belarus, the protesters are suffocated, are beaten, yes, but they are not executed, not taken to torture chambers, being tortured to death. They are not hanged. Why Belarus deserves the attention of Mr. Borrell and Iran does not? Somebody could explain to us this mystery. The United Nations sent a fact-finding mission to Venezuela. Very good, congratulations. Why do not they send a fact-finding mission to Iran, where things are so, or I would say, so bad or even worse, much worse than in Venezuela? How can the European Union and the United Nations remain silent in face of all these savage killings in Iran just to save the nuclear deal? How can the European Union leaders look to the eyes of the Iranian people who are suffering under the most brutal tyranny of many, many years and just do nothing? This must end, and this must end now. Enough is enough. The role of the European Parliament to stop this criminal theocracy of the mullahs is crucial. There are many members that reject this pusillanimous policy of the European Union and want to change it to a more committed and more firm stance. The European Parliament must keep and redouble the pressure on the Council, on the High Representative, on the European External Action Service until they take real action to protect the Iranian people from the brutal oppression of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and his thugs.
Buongiorno a tutti, saluto gli organizzatori di questo incontro, i colleghi europarlamentari presenti e tutti i partecipanti a questo dibattito. Sono più di 40 anni che l'Iran tiene in apprensione una parte della comunità internazionale per le sistematiche e inaccettabili violazioni dei diritti umani e delle libertà fondamentali, seguite alla rivoluzione islamica del 79. Oggi la situazione, che è ulteriormente peggiorata, richiede oltre a una maggiore attenzione e vigilanza anche interventi concreti da parte dell'Europa e soprattutto delle Nazioni Unite, di cui l'Iran è uno Stato membro. La popolazione iraniana è sempre meno favorevole al regime, sempre più affamata di cibo, di giustizia, di libertà e sempre più prossima a suscitare una rivolta di massa, che rischia di essere repressa con conseguenze gravissime.